The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 10th chapter. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and out and go and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So I'm going to start with the obvious. Chapter 10 of John comes right after chapter 9. Okay? Yeah. And the reason that that's important is because Jesus is talking to people, and it's important to know who he's talking to. So a couple of weeks ago, Clint actually gave a really good and expressive reading of chapter 9. And chapter 9 is the healing of the blind man. So you remember that Jesus made the mud with he spit in the dirt and made mud with his own spit, and he rubbed it on the eyes of the blind man with his own hands, and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, which was known as a pool of healing. And when the blind man told people how he became unblind, how he gained his sight, nobody believed him. Obviously he could see, he could tell them, what color their robe was or whatever, but he had to tell the story 3 times. And the audience has changed, but he told the story over and over and over again. And they still asked him, what happened? Who did this? And so it's important to remember that, because not only is Jesus talking to people that are following him, people that are already following the Good Shepherd, but he's also talking to Pharisees. But as Jesus goes into this, he's continuing this dialogue, and he leans into this parable that explains that seeing isn't really seeing. It's not really about sight. It isn't really about how tall the trees are, or if there are individual blades of grass, or if it's just green. Has anybody gotten glasses and been like, oh my gosh, those are individual rocks? But it's not even about that. It's about that third eye that Clint mentioned a couple of weeks ago. It's about the intuition and, let's see, the words that I wrote down were intuition and another one, gut reactions, right? Being able to discern. It's more about discernment. Alertness. That was the other one. The third eye is considered a seat of intuition and a source of alertness. And the Good Shepherd, whether it be of a flock or of people, relies on those things. The readings from this morning are really good at kind of fleshing out what Jesus is talking about. And we have our beloved psalm that we read together. And then this passage from Ezekiel chapter 34, as I was reading it in preparation, like my brain that does cross references was going ping, ping, ping. It's kind of like a pinball machine. Because almost any reference that you can find especially in the Gospels, and then also in the writings of 1 Peter and Hebrews, kind of reference both this chapter, and then there's a chapter in Jeremiah that's considered a parallel. And the parable of the lost sheep
is covered in Ezekiel 34. Like there are pictures from that chapter that are all over the New Testament. And I really want to kind of talk about that for a minute.
Because the thing is that the Bible is weird. And the reason that the Bible is weird, all of us have some kind of confidence that we know what the Bible is, even if it's just a little thing that tells us, oh, it's a book. Like we kind of have a concept as to what a book is, right? And if you know a little bit more about the Bible, you know that the Bible is a book of books, right? And it's a story that's filled with stories, and it's all individual pieces that are put together. It's a ledger, it's a narrative, it's poetry, it's legend, it's a lot of things. But above all, I think that it's a record of a people and their relationship with their God, with their shepherd. Peter Enns, if any of you know the Bible for Normal People, you know who Peter Enns is. He's pointed out that the Bible is weird because God let his children write the book. And if any of you have ever been handed a book written by a child, especially a younger child, like depending on their cognitive level and their artistic ability, you open the pages and you'll have stick figures with overdrawn lips. And you'll have dragons with teeny tiny wings. And so as you go through that book, like there's all these things that don't make sense, right? You'll have people with, 15-mile long legs, and then their arms are this small. And anyway, you get the idea. You all have children in your lives at some level, or you've been children. Yeah. So you open and you try to follow the storyline, and it starts with maybe two kids playing in the playground, and then all of a sudden they're at grandma's house making grilled cheese in the toaster. And there's no car ride, there's no bikes. We don't know how they got there. We just know they were hungry and they went to a place of comfort where they know they would be fed, which is grandma's house. But in the Bible, there are sheep and shepherds all over. I mean, the patriarchs were shepherds. Abraham was a shepherd. And when he and Lot went different ways, they had to divide their herds, right? Jacob, Esau, Isaac, Joseph was tending the sheep when his brothers arranged for him to be kidnapped and sold into slavery. That's another sermon. Moses was a shepherd. I mean, he was raised in Pharaoh's house, but after he killed the Egyptian, then he fled, and he sought solace in the shepherding hills of Midian, and he became if you look at Moses' life, it's a bit of a chiasm. A chiasm is where it's a form of poetry where you have a picture here and a picture here, and maybe a picture in the middle, and they kind of meet in the middle, usually. So you'll have, like, the form is A, B, C, B, A. So they all kind of point to the middle. And in Moses' life, he was raised in Pharaoh's house, right? So he was born into a rebellion, right? That's why Pharaoh was killing all the babies, because he didn't want any more slaves to rise up against him. But he's born into rebellion, and then he's picked up by Pharaoh's hand, or it says daughter, I think, maybe, but I'm not going to lean on that too much. But he's raised in Pharaoh's house, and he learns the way of the Egyptians, the ways of empire, if you will. And then after the murder that I already mentioned, he spends 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep. And then he comes back to Egypt, and then there's the whole let my people go thing. It's kind of a big deal, and which, if you think about the children's books, you can really imagine that. Like
you've got this river that's all red, and you're like, why is the river red? It's made of blood. And what are these little green specks all over? Those are frogs. and why do the cows have red spots all over them? They're boils. Yeah. So you can really picture, like, I'm not saying those things didn't happen, except maybe they didn't. But the point is that it's all fantastical. And there are reasons for it being fantastical. There are reasons to embellish stories and to build a narrative for a people so that they have somewhere to start. And really, that's what we have with the Bible. I mean, how many of us would be here without the Bible? I mean, yes, Jesus is our focus. He's the middle of our chiasm. So you've got the let my people go thing, and then he goes back to the wilderness to shepherd God's people. And in the wilderness, he's learning the ways of God. He's learning how to be a humble shepherd. Because, I mean, he tries his best. He does things his way, and God continually tells him, no, that's not the way we're going to get water. That's not the way we're going to feed people. He tells them, I'm going to provide. So he learns to trust God and God's ways. So he goes from empire to humbleness. But continuing with the shepherd picture, he learns to trust God and that God will shepherd them to a better pasture. And I mean, obviously there's more shepherds. There's David, little guy, became a king. Like Obama's first job was scooping ice cream, and he became president. Not the same thing, but and I mean, if you look at David's reign, and like sometimes he was a good king and sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes Moses was a good shepherd and sometimes he wasn't. But the thing about shepherds is that they're not known for being the hot shots. They're not the big men on campus. I mean, there's a reason why Joseph, the second youngest son, was out herding the sheep. And David was a younger son out herding the sheep. Like if you look at the way that family herds are run today, the average shepherd is a teenage girl and her younger brother. So like they're not known for being the big guys, right? So like when you're thinking of shepherds and you think of the birth narrative of Jesus, and like, is that who we imagine on the hillside when they were accosted by the angels? The angels come, wait, don't fear. We're just here to bring good news. And you've got these young, small shepherds that are, out in the wilderness with their sheep. So we don't usually imagine a gaggle of teenagers. But I think what I'm getting at is that the expectations of the Pharisees from chapter 9 were that they had an idea as to who was worthy of being healed. That's why they asked the blind man, why were you blind? Was it because of your sin? Was it because of your parents' sin? They were trying to figure out if he was worthy. And they had an idea as to who was worthy to bring the hands and feet of God, to actually do the healing. I mean, did they approve of the Nazarene who came and made mud and put it on this guy's eyes? Like, is that their approved method of healing? I think not, or they wouldn't have asked the question so many times. They thought that they were the gatekeepers, and Jesus comes back and says, I am the gate. They thought that they were the gatekeepers and that they held a position with God, and they felt that they had a position in their understanding of what God's story was. And they did. I mean, without the stories of the Pharisees, we wouldn't have Jesus rebelling not just against the Roman Empire, but also the religious system. And some of us need that in our lives. Like I feel like Good Shepherd obviously is a safe place, or I wouldn't be here. But instead of truly providing a safe space where the sheepfold were allowed to trust the Good Shepherd, who is Jesus, instead of allowing them to, okay, I got to go back to this note because I think it's important. Jesus came to disrupt the images. He became an eraser that scrubbed away the lines that they had drawn, because they thought that because they held the Word of God, the prophets and the law in one hand, and then they had this authority in the other hand, they felt like it was their job to keep the sheep safe by drawing lines and saying, you can go here and you can go there, but you can't go anywhere else. You can do this on the Sabbath and you can do that on the Sabbath, but you can't do anything else. So they took it upon themselves to be the shepherds, but then they became more than just shepherds. They were building walls that they thought were protecting the sheep and feeding them. And the word of God is called our food, our bread of life, right? So they thought that they were providing the food when in fact they were allowing the sheep to starve. And that's something of why Jesus came. In the back to the Ezekiel package, it's a package. The Ezekiel passage, Ezekiel chapter 34, it talks about the shepherds not only failing to feed the sheep, but also getting fat on the sheep. So they were having a lot of shepherd's pie, which traditionally is lamb. So they were not only not doing their job as shepherds, but they were feeding off the sheep. Some of us came from places like that. We came from shepherds that were not doing their job. And maybe it's because they were making sure that their house payment was made. And maybe it was because they felt like they had a God-given mandate to take care of the sheep. But whenever they themselves stop listening to the voice of the Good Shepherd, then they can lose their way too. I wrote in my notes that it was men, because usually it's men, because of patriarchy and complementarianism, which is another sermon. But they thought they were given a position with God, and they received some kind of validation, and they were given some kind of authority. So instead of providing a truly safe space, a sheepfold, where the sheep were allowed to trust in the Good Shepherd who opens the gate and sets us free from boundaries that humans imagine, they thought it was their place to shut the gate and keep us in. Of course, Jesus says in this passage that he saves us to come in and out and go and find pasture. So we're not just in the sheepfold. The church that I came from was it was very inward focused. There was hardly any ministries toward the outside world at all. And that's not what the church is for. The church exists for itself, but it also exists for the world. That's why Jesus says, be a light unto the world. All these things where he sends after he prepares the disciples, he sends them out. And he sends them, 2 by 2. Take a staff or don't, depends on which translation you're reading. But they always come back to the sheepfold to re-energize, to be fed. Hopefully we've done a little feeding today. So he doesn't send them out all willy-nilly, but he trusts the sheep because it's a what's the word? Where you have two relationships that build upon each other? Symbiotic relationship, that's right. The sheep trust the shepherd, but then the shepherd also trusts the sheep. I mean, the shepherd isn't, worried about going around with cattle. I don't know if they're smarter than sheep or not. But if you're driving cattle, you have to go around the perimeter very often to kind of bring them back in. Maybe they're just more willful. I don't know. I didn't grow up with sheep, but I did grow up with cattle. And just a couple of years ago, I went out to the family farm, and we had a teenage calf that he'd gotten out, or she, I think it was a girl. Anyway, they'd gotten out, and my uncle was on one four-wheeler, and I was on the other, and we were trying to get it back into, the enclosure, it was a mess. And both of us, like, it was a dusty day, and we both came back in with, like, our backs were covered with dust, chasing this sheep all around, or this cattle all around. Anyway, but not only was that one out, it had a friend that had followed it, so we had to get both of them back in. Because, I mean, if you have a shepherd and a sheep, you just have an owner and a pet. But a shepherd really needs a flock, right? But you see, Jesus' sheep are people of ears and eyes, but also that third eye. Our good shepherd not only uses second sight, but he trusts that we have second sight. The tradition I came from, I've said before that I read all of the approved material, right? And then when I started reading things that were outside of the approved reading list, that's when I started to get questions about my faith. And I was like, wait a minute. So when I was reading the things you wanted me to read, I had the Holy Spirit and was being guided by God. But since I've started reading some of these other things that are also in the church's tradition, it's not so much, approved, or it's all questionable at that point. But we do need the flock. Our pastor's out of town, and the word pastor means shepherd. It's one of those words that, it leads to a meaning. But he's also a sheep. But in that, we trust him to be a good sheep and to listen to the voice of the good shepherd. And then he also trusts us. I mean, if you've ever sat in a real conversation with Clint about theology or the Bible, and you ask him a question, sometimes he'll say, I don't know. And he'll say, what have you read about it? Because he's not just a giver. He needs to eat too. So, just one more, one more thought is that one person with a sheep is a pet owner. So there's a whole other sermon about the flock ministering to one another. And one of the ways I wanted to point that out was I brought this hymnal. You can go ahead and pull out your hymnal and turn to the King of Love, My Shepherd Is, number 503. Now, if you open your hymnal and I open this hymnal, you'll notice that it's not the same, right? So what are the differences? I handed this to Ted and Paul, and Elaine was looking at it too, but one of the main differences you'll notice is that it's just words, right? So this hymnal is from 1850. It was made the same year as my cello, for reference. But this hymnal came from the state of New York. My brother purchased it on eBay, so it's not like a family heirloom or anything like that. But he knows that I'm a weirdo, and I like things like this. So this is my big Christmas present one year. And but if you look at the text, it's just text. Like you have a first line for each verse, and they're numbered. And Paul pointed out that the hymn numbers are in Roman numerals. So there's already a disconnect, right? And then it will give the meter for the hymn, but no music. So if Mary Beth was playing this, she'd have to know a hymn that was already those. I don't know what P stands for, but this is common long meter, CLM. She'd already have to know a song that was common long meter, so that she could play, and we could sing that tune with her playing. And the way that hymnody worked is a congregation might know 10 tunes, all to different meters, and they would just sing hymns to those 10 tunes. And if they would learn more tunes upon that, but this psalm, or this psalm, because it is a psalm, this hymn that we're going to sing was actually written by the first person to put music in hymnals, which is a really cool little thing. Henry Williams Baker, is that right? And also, just a little bit of weird nerd trivia. His middle name is actually his mother's maiden name, which is a common thing Matt and I were talking about. A lot of people will use the mother's maiden name as a child's middle name. Anyway, but just this is one of the ways that we shepherd one another. Both of our liturgy pieces that we use at the beginning of service are written in this church, both the music and the words. So, I mean, we borrow from the tradition of a Kyrie, and we borrow from the tradition of a glory song, but these are the reasons why we have something to borrow from. And one of the readings for today in the lectionary is from 1 Peter, and he talks about us being a sheep and a fold together is basically the idea, and that comes right after him talking about us being a household. And the picture that he uses is brick by brick. And so when we look at these rocks on our walls here, these bottom bricks might be the disciples, and then we have Ignatius and some of the early church fathers. And then we have Augustine. He's a tiny rock there, but people give him a big spot. We can talk about that later if you want. But and then we have, it goes all the way to Martin Luther, and then we have Martin Luther King Jr., which I think was the leader of one of the biggest church revivals in the world that goes unrecognized as a move of the Spirit of God. But anyway, we are a household of faith built upon the rock of one another. And so we're going to go ahead and, also this song, whenever he wrote this psalm, he was an Englishman, and he actually translated this from a Welsh version. And the guy who wrote the Welsh version, he had a friend that they would send poems back and forth to each other, kind of like a rap battle. And whoever couldn't come up with the next poem was the loser. And one of their interactions was 50 poems long. So they each had written at least 24. Well, I guess it's an even number. So maybe they each wrote 25 and all right, let's move on to a new topic. But this is a beautiful translation, and it's all over the church. So we're going to go ahead and sing it.